Part 1 opens in a desolate, windswept western landscape where the isolation of the frontier is emphasized. The sun is dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across Ethan Walker's ranch. The cabin, built from weathered timber, stands as the only sign of human life in a seemingly endless expanse of plains. Ethan, the rancher, is introduced as a rugged, solitary man shaped by years of hard labor and hardship. His life has been one of routine, tending cattle, maintaining the property, and keeping to himself. This isolation reflects not only the physical remoteness of the ranch, but also Ethan's emotional distance from others, hinting at unspoken regrets or past misdeeds. As Ethan tends to his evening chores, a sense of unease begins to creep into the narrative. The natural setting, though beautiful, carries an undercurrent of menace. The wind whispers through the tall grasses and shadows stretch unnaturally across the landscape. This establishes a foreboding atmosphere and primes the reader for the entrance of the mysterious stranger. The tension is amplified by the quietness of the ranch, the kind of quiet that feels almost unnatural, as if the land itself is holding its breath in anticipation. Suddenly, a figure appears in the distance. The stranger's approach is slow and deliberate, immediately drawing attention. He is cloaked and calm, his presence unnerving because it contrasts sharply with the rugged, practical nature of the ranch and its solitary owner. From the first moment, there is a sense that this man does not belong to the ordinary world of cattle and dust. There is something almost supernatural about his aura. Ethan notices subtle details. The stranger's eyes catch the last rays of sunlight in an unusual way, and his movements are unnervingly controlled. These small but deliberate details heighten the suspense and establish the stranger as a figure who will disrupt Ethan's world. The stranger requests shelter, using polite but unnervingly calm language. Ethan's instincts immediately warn him against granting entry. He senses a danger he cannot fully articulate, a classic tension between hospitality and self-preservation. Here, Ethan's character is revealed through his internal conflict. He is cautious and aware of the risks of letting strangers into such an isolated place, yet there is also a moral hesitation. This moment sets up the central tension of the story. Ethan is faced with a choice that will define the course of events and test his courage, judgment, and morality. The part ends with Ethan making a tentative decision, leaving the reader on edge. The stranger stands at the threshold, an ambiguous figure whose motives are unclear. The combination of the isolated setting, Ethan's solitary life, and the stranger's unsettling demeanor creates an immediate sense of suspense and dread. By the end of Part 1, the stage is set for a story that will explore fear, moral confrontation, and the unknown, establishing a dark, gripping tone for what follows. Part 2 deepens the tension established in Part 1 by focusing on the stranger's unnerving request. Please, just make it quick. This plea is both simple and haunting, immediately signaling that something urgent and dangerous is at play. The phrasing is ambiguous, leaving Ethan and the reader uncertain whether it refers to a literal act, a moral choice, or even a life-or-death decision. The ambiguity intensifies the suspense and forces Ethan to confront his instincts and moral compass. Ethan's initial reaction is a mix of fear, confusion, and curiosity. He instinctively senses danger, though he cannot immediately identify the source. The stranger's calm demeanor contrasts sharply with the tension Ethan feels, making the situation feel almost surreal. This contrast serves to heighten the sense of unease. The stranger is composed, perhaps even inhumanly so, while Ethan is aware of the fragility of his own life and the vulnerability of his isolated position. The psychological tension is key here, as the story shifts from a simple Western setting to a scenario that feels increasingly like a moral and supernatural trial. The narrative then uses a flashback to provide depth to Ethan's character. We learn that he has a past marked by betrayal. He once crossed someone dangerous, and the consequences of that action still linger in his conscience. This backstory is crucial because it establishes why the stranger's words and presence unsettle him so deeply. It also hints that the events unfolding are not entirely random. There is a connection between Ethan's past actions and the peril he now faces. The flashback adds layers to Ethan's internal conflict, emphasizing that this encounter is not just physical danger, but a reckoning for his past choices. The stranger's plea also introduces a theme of inevitability. By asking for the action to be quick, he implies that delay could be fatal or that hesitation will worsen the outcome. This creates a psychological pressure on Ethan, forcing him to make a decision under duress. The moment reflects the broader narrative tension between action and inaction, courage and fear. Ethan must weigh the potential consequences of granting shelter against the unknown risk posed by refusal. This moral dilemma is central to the story, setting up a narrative arc where ethical choices are inseparable from survival. Finally, the atmosphere continues to build with vivid sensory details. The wind outside the cabin grows colder, shadows lengthen, and the encroaching night mirrors the growing uncertainty and dread inside Ethan. The interplay of natural elements with the psychological tension creates a cinematic effect, making the reader feel the oppressive weight of isolation and fear. By the end of Part 2, the stage is set. Ethan is acutely aware of the stranger's mysterious power and his own precarious position, poised on the edge of a choice that will dictate the unfolding conflict. Part 3, titled The Devil's Eyes, marks a turning point in the narrative where the mysterious stranger fully asserts his eerie presence and the story shifts from suspenseful uncertainty to a more psychologically intense and possibly supernatural tone. This part centers on Ethan Walker's first direct confrontation with the stranger's gaze, which is described as unnerving, almost inhuman, and filled with an inexplicable intensity. The eyes become a focal point, symbolizing the stranger's power and the impending reckoning for Ethan. By giving emphasis to the eyes, the story externalizes Ethan's internal fears and guilt, making the encounter both literal and metaphorical. As Ethan looks into the stranger's eyes, he experiences a profound, almost paralyzing sense of unease. These eyes seem to penetrate his very soul, unearthing memories and regrets that Ethan has long tried to bury. This moment reveals the psychological depth of the stranger's influence. He is not merely a physical threat, but a mirror to Ethan's conscience. The narrative highlights Ethan's growing awareness that the stranger knows far more than any ordinary visitor could, hinting at a supernatural or otherworldly origin. The fear Ethan experiences is a mix of dread, fascination, and moral reckoning, making this scene pivotal for character development and thematic exploration. The stranger's gaze also serves as a catalyst for reflection. Ethan begins to recall pivotal moments in his past, choices made, betrayals committed, and failures to act when courage was required. These memories are triggered by the intensity of the stranger's eyes, as if they are probing for truth, holding Ethan accountable in a way that no one else could. The story uses this moment to explore themes of guilt, accountability, and the inevitability of facing the consequences of one's actions. By making the eyes the conduit of these realizations, the narrative builds an almost mythic aura around the stranger, elevating him beyond mere human threat into the realm of a moral arbiter or harbinger. Atmospherically, the setting amplifies the tension. The cabin, already isolated and shadowed by the encroaching night, feels smaller and more confining as Ethan's anxiety mounts. Every creak of timber and whisper of wind echoes the growing psychological pressure. The narrative may employ subtle supernatural hints, the flickering of firelight, shadows that seem to move independently, or the stranger's eyes reflecting light in impossible ways, to reinforce the sense that Ethan is encountering more than a man. He is facing a force tied to his own conscience and the broader moral universe. Finally, Part 3 sets the stage for the story's escalating conflict. The encounter with the stranger's eyes forces Ethan to confront a terrifying truth. He cannot ignore or rationalize the danger. The stranger embodies both the unknown external threat and the internal reckoning that Ethan has long avoided. This confrontation solidifies the psychological tension, making the reader acutely aware that the story is moving toward a collision of morality, courage, and supernatural reckoning. By the end of this part, Ethan is trapped in a web of fear, reflection, and anticipation, fully aware that his next choices could define not only his survival, but the fate of his very soul. Part 4, titled The Warning, escalates the tension as the stranger begins to reveal knowledge of Ethan Walker's life, deepening the psychological and moral stakes. The stranger speaks with a calm, unnerving certainty, revealing details about Ethan's past that no outsider could know, betrayals, regrets, and choices that left lasting consequences. These revelations are precise, intimate, and unsettling, striking at Ethan's core and forcing him to confront memories he has tried to suppress. By presenting these truths, the stranger establishes himself as more than a mere visitor. He is an agent of reckoning, someone who sees and judges without bias or mercy. The narrative emphasizes Ethan's internal reaction to this revelation. At first, he reacts with disbelief and defensiveness, questioning how the stranger could possibly know such personal details. However, as the stranger recounts moment after moment with unnerving accuracy, Ethan cannot deny the truth in the words. This confrontation with undeniable reality triggers a mix of fear, guilt, and shame, which the story uses to explore Ethan's psychological depth. It is a turning point. The external threat represented by the stranger becomes inseparable from Ethan's internal struggle with his past actions. The stranger's cryptic tone adds a layer of ambiguity that intensifies suspense. He does not overtly threaten Ethan, but his knowledge alone is intimidating, suggesting that consequences are inevitable. The warning implies that Ethan has a choice, yet any choice carries weight and potential peril. The stranger frames the situation in terms of moral reckoning. Ethan can face his past and take responsibility, or he can ignore it and suffer dire consequences. This framing positions the stranger as both a supernatural and ethical arbiter, emphasizing the story's themes of justice, accountability, and the inescapable nature of one's actions. The narrative continues to build atmosphere by combining psychological tension with the physical isolation of the ranch. The wind howls outside, shadows twist across the cabin walls, and the fading light of day mirrors Ethan's growing sense of entrapment. These elements reinforce the idea that Ethan is confronting not only a powerful stranger, but also the emptiness and vulnerability of his solitary life. The environment mirrors the internal stakes, creating a seamless blend of external threat and psychological dread. Symbolically, Part 4 explores the motif of revelation and illumination. The stranger's revelations are like a harsh light exposing Ethan's hidden flaws, forcing clarity in a situation previously clouded by denial and avoidance. This exposure is essential for character development, as it compels Ethan to confront who he truly is rather than who he wishes to be. By the end of this part, Ethan realizes that the stranger's presence is not random. It is a catalyst for confrontation, a warning that his past actions have set events in motion that cannot be undone. The tension is now fully established, and the story gears up for the next phase, the moral and physical trials that will test Ethan's courage, integrity, and survival instincts. Part 5, titled The Deal, represents a crucial turning point in the story, where the psychological tension established in the earlier parts begins to transform into action and moral decision-making. At this stage, the mysterious stranger moves beyond revelation and warning, presenting Ethan Walker with an ambiguous proposition, a deal that tests both his courage and his morality. The atmosphere remains thick with dread, and the stakes are sharply defined. Ethan's life, his legacy, and potentially his soul are now on the line. The deal is presented with an unsettling calm. The stranger does not demand compliance outright, but offers Ethan a choice: to take decisive action in response to his past sins or to remain passive, risking severe consequences. The ambiguity of the deal heightens suspense. It is not framed as a simple bargain. Rather, it is a moral challenge. Ethan realizes that the stranger is forcing him to confront his deepest fears and regrets in tangible terms. The language of the deal, cryptic, almost ritualistic, underscores the stranger's otherworldly presence and positions him as both judge and guide. This shifts the story into a psychological thriller as much as a supernatural western. Ethan's internal conflict becomes the focal point. He is torn between fear and responsibility, instinct and reflection. Accepting the deal may require him to cross moral boundaries he has long avoided, committing acts that could haunt him further, even if they promise survival. Ignoring or refusing the stranger's proposal could lead to death or a fate worse than death, as implied by the stranger's earlier warnings. This conflict emphasizes one of the story's central themes, the inevitability of facing consequences and the ethical weight of choice. Ethan is no longer a passive character. He is now an agent in a high-stakes moral equation. The narrative continues to heighten suspense through atmospheric detail. The isolated ranch becomes a symbolic arena for the moral struggle. Shadows creep across the cabin walls as the fire flickers, mirroring Ethan's uncertainty and fear. The stranger's calm, almost predatory presence contrasts sharply with Ethan's heightened tension, creating a cinematic interplay between control and vulnerability. Even the natural elements, the wind, the creaking timber, the dying light, contribute to the sense that Ethan's environment is conspiring to force him toward a decision. The combination of isolation, supernatural undertones, and moral urgency gives the scene a timeless, allegorical quality, making it feel both intimate and epic. Symbolically, the deal represents the intersection of fate and free will. Ethan's life has been shaped by past decisions, and now he must confront them directly. The stranger's offer is a crucible, testing not only physical courage, but also the strength of character and integrity. By the end of Part 5, Ethan is on the cusp of action, fully aware that the next steps he takes will define his destiny. The deal serves as a narrative fulcrum, propelling the story into a series of trials and confrontations that will test every aspect of Ethan's humanity, morality, and resilience. Part 6, titled The Test, marks the beginning of Ethan Walker's active trials, transforming the story from psychological tension and moral contemplation into a series of high-stakes challenges that test his courage, resourcefulness, and ethical boundaries. Following the ambiguous deal presented by the stranger in Part 5, Ethan now faces tangible manifestations of the warnings and revelations that have been building. This section is crucial for character development, as it places Ethan in situations that reveal not only his abilities, but also the depth of his inner struggles. The test begins with immediate, disorienting challenges. Ethan encounters situations designed to provoke fear, uncertainty, and moral decision-making. These may include physical obstacles, such as navigating treacherous terrain, surviving a sudden natural threat, or confronting hostile figures, interwoven with surreal or supernatural elements. The stranger's presence is felt even when not physically nearby. His influence looms like a shadow, reminding Ethan that failure to act decisively may carry consequences beyond mere survival. This blend of realistic and supernatural trials creates a tension that keeps both Ethan and the reader constantly on edge. A critical aspect of this part is the interplay between external action and internal reflection. Each trial forces Ethan to confront memories and regrets highlighted in earlier parts. Hallucinations or visions may confront him with past failures, lost opportunities, or people he betrayed, making the tests not merely physical but deeply psychological. These confrontations compel Ethan to examine his past actions honestly and weigh them against his current choices. The tests are structured not as arbitrary punishments, but as moral crucibles designed to reveal Ethan's true character, courage, and capacity for redemption. The atmosphere continues to amplify the intensity of the trials. The remote ranch and surrounding wilderness function almost as an extension of Ethan's psyche, reflecting his isolation, fear, and moral uncertainty. The wind howls through empty canyons, shadows twist unpredictably, and the encroaching darkness mirrors Ethan's internal struggle. The narrative uses these environmental cues to heighten suspense and underscore the significance of the tests. Ethan is not merely fighting for survival, he is fighting for moral clarity and self-understanding. The stranger's role in Part 6 becomes both observer and orchestrator. He does not intervene directly, but ensures that the challenges align with Ethan's weaknesses and past choices. His cryptic guidance serves as both warning and instruction, pushing Ethan toward decisive action while leaving him morally accountable for the outcomes. This dynamic reinforces the story's central themes of accountability, courage, and the inevitability of facing one's past. By the end of Part 6, Ethan emerges from the initial tests altered. He is more aware of his own resilience and limitations, and the trials have begun to strip away any illusions about avoiding consequences. This part sets the stage for the deeper, more morally complex confrontations to come, establishing a rhythm of challenge, reflection, and growth that drives the narrative forward. The reader gains a heightened sense that Ethan's journey is as much about inner reckoning as it is about external survival. Part 7, titled The Revelation, represents a pivotal turning point in the narrative, where Ethan Walker begins to understand the true nature of the mysterious stranger and the full magnitude of the trials he faces. Up to this point, Ethan has been reacting to the stranger's cryptic warnings, the eerie gaze that seems to pierce his soul, and the harrowing tests of courage and morality. In this section, the story shifts from suspense and confusion to clarity, as both Ethan and the reader learn that the stranger is not simply an intruder or a criminal, but a harbinger of moral reckoning, an agent whose purpose is to confront those who evade the consequences of their actions. The revelation begins subtly, through a combination of dialogue, symbolic imagery, and Ethan's growing insight. The stranger demonstrates knowledge and perception that go beyond ordinary human capability, revealing the intricate web of cause and effect stemming from Ethan's past choices. Scenes may include visions of past events, vivid reminders of people Ethan has wronged, or impossible knowledge that confirms the stranger's supernatural qualities. These elements emphasize the story's theme of inevitable accountability. The stranger exists to ensure that past actions are confronted and moral debts are paid. Ethan experiences a complex mix of fear, awe, and moral clarity during this revelation. The realization that the stranger embodies judgment forces him to confront his own life with brutal honesty. For the first time, Ethan understands that the quick request, the plea that began the story, was not a literal demand for an action, but a warning about the urgency of facing consequences. The narrative explores his internal struggle in depth. He feels guilt, shame, and regret, yet also a spark of determination. The revelation transforms his fear into a focused resolve, giving him the moral and psychological framework to act decisively in the trials ahead. The story also emphasizes the symbolic dimension of this part. The stranger's eyes, previously described as unnerving and almost supernatural, now take on a more defined significance. They are a mirror reflecting Ethan's inner self, exposing his weaknesses, fears, and unacknowledged misdeeds. This symbolic lens allows the narrative to explore themes of morality, justice, and human nature without relying solely on external conflict. Ethan's confrontation with the stranger is as much an internal reckoning as it is a suspenseful encounter, reinforcing the story's depth and tension. Atmospherically, Part 7 heightens suspense while providing clarity. The isolation of the ranch and the encroaching night mirror Ethan's inner journey from confusion to awareness. Shadows twist more dramatically, the wind carries a sense of expectation, and the natural world seems attuned to the moral stakes at hand. This alignment between environment and internal conflict deepens the reader's engagement, creating a scene that is visually and emotionally vivid. By the end of Part 7, Ethan has a clear understanding of the stranger's role. He is not simply a threat, but a test of character, a living embodiment of consequences. This revelation raises the stakes for subsequent actions and sets the stage for the next phase of the story, where Ethan must confront tangible challenges that will force him to prove courage, integrity, and moral resolve in ways that will define his fate. Part 8, titled The Confrontation, serves as the narrative's first major climax, where the tension between Ethan Walker and the mysterious stranger reaches its most immediate and palpable point. Up until this section, Ethan has been largely reactive, grappling with fear, moral reflection, and cryptic warnings, but now he must engage directly with both the external and internal challenges set before him. This confrontation combines physical peril, psychological intensity, and moral complexity. making it a critical moment for character development and plot escalation. The confrontation begins as Ethan is forced into a high-stakes scenario where he can no longer delay action. The stranger, having revealed his supernatural awareness and moral authority, now orchestrates events to test Ethan's courage, decisiveness, and ethical judgment in a concrete, unavoidable way. The challenge may take the form of a physical battle, a life-threatening situation, or a symbolic trial that externalizes Ethan's internal fears and past failures. The environment itself amplifies the tension. The wind howls across the desolate plains. Shadows twist unnaturally around the cabin, and the dying light of day adds a sense of finality and urgency to the moment. These elements underscore the convergence of internal and external conflict. Ethan's psychological state is central to this part. He is aware that this confrontation is a direct reflection of his own moral and ethical past. The stranger's presence forces him to face consequences for actions he has long avoided. Flashbacks may interweave with the present scene, reminding him and the reader of pivotal moments of weakness, betrayal, or inaction that have led him here. This interplay of past and present elevates the confrontation beyond mere physical danger into a profound moral and existential reckoning. Ethan's fear, guilt, and self-doubt intensify, yet they are tempered by the growing recognition that courage and decisive action are the only means to navigate this trial. Symbolically, the confrontation represents a duel between Ethan's former self, the man shaped by regret, fear, and moral compromise, and the potential for redemption offered by the stranger's challenge. The stranger functions as both antagonist and mirror, revealing the consequences of past actions while demanding that Ethan act in accordance with his conscience. Every decision Ethan makes in this section, whether to fight, flee, or act morally in the face of danger, carries weight, reinforcing the story's central themes of accountability, integrity, and the moral cost of survival. The pacing and intensity of Part 8 are heightened by vivid sensory detail and rapid narrative beats. Sounds of the wind, creaking wood, or distant wildlife punctuate Ethan's thoughts and actions, creating a cinematic sense of immediacy. Shadows and light play a role in the psychological tension, with the environment seeming almost alive, responding to Ethan's emotional state. The stranger's presence, calm yet omnipotent, adds an almost supernatural gravity to the encounter, emphasizing that this confrontation is about more than survival. It is a test of character, judgment, and moral courage. By the end of Part 8, the confrontation leaves Ethan irrevocably changed. He gains a clearer understanding of the stakes and of his own inner strength, yet the resolution is incomplete, maintaining suspense and preparing the narrative for the deeper moral and existential choices that will follow. The confrontation solidifies the story's tension while advancing Ethan toward his ultimate reckoning. Part 9, titled The Choice, represents the narrative's moral and emotional climax, where Ethan Walker faces the ultimate decision that will determine not only his survival, but also the ethical weight of his life. After enduring the stranger's warnings, revelations, and trials, Ethan now confronts a situation that forces him to reconcile his past actions with the present moment, highlighting the story's central theme, accountability and the consequences of moral choices. At this stage, Ethan is acutely aware of the stakes. The stranger's presence looms over him, reminding him that hesitation or avoidance carries consequences potentially worse than death. The choice presented is morally complex. Ethan must decide between self-preservation and a form of sacrifice that may involve physical danger, the correction of past wrongs, or adherence to a strict moral code. The ambiguity of the decision emphasizes the narrative's tension. There is no easy or clear path, and every option carries both risk and ethical implications. This ambiguity mirrors real-life dilemmas, enhancing the story's psychological depth. Ethan's internal conflict is central to this part. He reflects on the cumulative lessons from the previous trials, the confrontations with fear, past mistakes, and the stranger's unnerving insight into his conscience. These reflections force him to weigh the long-term consequences of his actions against immediate survival instincts. The narrative may depict flashbacks of his failures, betrayals, and moments of moral weakness, juxtaposed with potential outcomes of the choice before him. This creates a layered emotional landscape, demonstrating that the decision is as much about character and integrity as it is about life or death. The stranger's role during this moment reinforces the gravity of the choice. He functions less as an active antagonist and more as a silent arbiter, a presence whose judgment is implicit rather than overt. By stepping back, the stranger forces Ethan to rely on his own moral compass, highlighting the theme that true accountability comes from within. The dialogue, or lack thereof, between them underscores the tension. Ethan is both judged and empowered, free to make a choice but fully aware of the consequences. The physical and atmospheric elements of the story amplify the suspense and moral weight of the moment. The ranch, isolated and windswept, mirrors Ethan's inner turmoil. Shadows stretch and shift. The wind howls through empty fields, and darkness creeps over the landscape, creating an almost apocalyptic backdrop that reinforces the seriousness of the decision. The environment becomes a character itself, reflecting Ethan's fear, indecision, and eventual resolve. Ultimately, Part 9 is a test of Ethan's moral courage. The choice he makes will reveal the depth of his character and set the stage for the resolution of the story. Whether he opts for self-sacrifice, moral redemption, or survival at a cost, the decision crystallizes the narrative's exploration of human responsibility, the inevitability of facing one's past, and the intersection of fear and conscience. This moment ensures that the climax is not just action-driven, but ethically resonant, preparing the reader for the story's final resolution and the lingering consequences of Ethan's journey. Part 10, titled The Aftermath, serves as the story's resolution, bringing closure to Ethan Walker's journey while leaving lingering emotional and psychological resonance. This section explores the consequences of Ethan's choices, the impact of the stranger's trials, and the transformation of both character and setting. Unlike the earlier parts, which emphasize tension, suspense, and confrontation, the aftermath focuses on reflection, revelation, and the subtle, often unsettling consequences of moral action. Following the climactic events of Part 9, Ethan finds himself changed in profound ways. The trials have forced him to confront his deepest fears, regrets, and moral failings, and the choice he made has solidified a new understanding of responsibility and courage. Whether his decision involved self-sacrifice, a courageous act of redemption, or a morally difficult survival tactic, the aftermath emphasizes the emotional and ethical weight of that action. Ethan's internal transformation is central. He emerges more aware of his own strengths and flaws, and more conscious of the consequences of past and present decisions. This personal evolution is the story's emotional core, showing that true reckoning is as much about self-awareness as external survival. The stranger's role in the aftermath is deliberately ambiguous. Having fulfilled his function as arbiter, judge, and catalyst, he vanishes, leaving Ethan to process the events alone. This disappearance underscores the mysterious and possibly supernatural nature of the figure, suggesting that his presence was less about physical confrontation and more about moral testing. The stranger's departure also reinforces the theme of individual responsibility. While guidance or judgment may appear from outside, the ultimate reckoning and growth lie within the individual. The lingering ambiguity about the stranger's nature adds an eerie, reflective tone, leaving the reader with a sense of unresolved mystery. The physical setting mirrors Ethan's psychological state. The ranch, which has been the backdrop for isolation, fear, and confrontation, now becomes a place of quiet reflection. The wind may still whisper through the plains, shadows may stretch in the fading light, and the environment retains hints of the supernatural or uncanny, reflecting that while the immediate threat has passed, the experiences have left an indelible mark. This careful alignment of atmosphere and emotion reinforces the story's tone, blending realism with subtle, lingering unease. Symbolically, the aftermath explores themes of redemption, consequence, and the enduring nature of moral choices. Ethan's experiences illustrate that actions, both past and present, carry weight beyond immediate perception. Even if he survives physically, the ethical and emotional consequences remain, shaping his character and his future decisions. This allows the story to conclude with a sense of completeness, while maintaining a reflective, almost haunting resonance. Finally, Part 10 leaves the reader with a mix of closure and ambiguity. Ethan has endured the trials, faced the stranger, and made his defining choice. Yet the story emphasizes that moral reckoning is continuous and that the impact of difficult decisions lingers. The resolution provides emotional satisfaction and narrative closure while maintaining a haunting, thought-provoking atmosphere, ensuring that the story remains compelling and resonant long after the final page.